Margavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Eric Gallagher, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome back to Divide and Conquer as we continue with another faction overview, this time of Angmar. Now, before we get into any of that, allow me just to say, if you downloaded 1.2 on the 6th of January, or the GMT morning of the 7th of January, so basically if you downloaded it any time before English time, midday on the 7th of January, I'd suggest you re-download it. Because there were two minor little niggling bugs, and I kind of very sneakily just updated the installer with the fixes for them, and then replaced both installers on MediaFire and ModDB. Now, the only change that brings is the Dwarven Fort battle map was crashing, because I put it in the wrong folder. It was all my fault. So I just fixed that. And also Fenris Druin, and now at the beginning of the game, you may notice looks like a Middle Eastern village, and it's supposed to be a ring of tents, and I fixed that as well. But also there's about 70 more loading screens that have been added by El Monstero, just to add a little bit of variety when you're loading up between battles, and I pop those in as well. So if you re-download on ModDB, you'll notice that the file is called DaC 1.2.3, and that's because ModDB appends an extra number to it if you replace the file. And I initially replaced it and then realised I'd forgotten something, so I had to replace it again. So ModDB thinks we're on the third version of 1.2. But then that works in my favour, because then if you re-download it now, or if you just download from this point forward, you'll have it anyway. You can't not get the old one because I've replaced it. But if you download it, if you're one of the 1,260 odd people who downloaded on the 6th of January, then I'd suggest you re-download just to fix the Dwarven Fort battle maps. So you need to re-download and just reinstall. Now, I could have done a little hotfix, but I really didn't want 5 files, and we were only 1 day into the release, and I just thought, screw it. But we're going to get a few questions now, because of course the file is called 1.2.3, and on the installation video, my file is called 1.2. So I'll have to put a little message up, I think. But anyway, beyond that, let's dive into Angmar. So welcome to the 1.2 and beyond Angmar overview video. Now, this, of course, is my most up-to-date build, so this is even ahead of all of what you're doing. I've already got things in here that are for version 2, whenever that will be, in a year's time or whatever. But, and I also just wanted to bring attention to this message for all of you that's in 1.2, because I really implore you to read it. If you've never played Third Age, which is not advised, you should play Third Age before you load DaC. And if you've never even played Med 2, if you've bought Med 2 just to play DaC, then please read this message, because it will update you on all of the features of the game that you're going to think are bugs, and they're not. So, let's crack on with Angmar then. So, Angmar, the nation of, rather, sorry. Let's first start by talking about your starting domain as the turn flips through. So, as you can see, Angmar don't actually start with very much. You get 3 regions at the start of the game. Karndum is your capital, the castle to the north. You get Shadun, which is quite a large city for its size, and you get the dwarven castle of Litash. And these are your starting provinces. Outside of that, you don't really get too much. But in terms of the army that you get... Oh, and also, somebody did question that. Karndum is a castle. I don't know who said it wasn't, but it is. Madness. Anywho, so your starting army to go along with your 3 starting regions is Agendaur and a few units in Karndum, which is he's got some pretty good units. The Orc Marauders and the Halberdiers are good in the early game. They're Angmar's bread and butter, so it's good to have a couple of those. In this Angmarim fort just here, you'll notice has the new Orc fort style battle map. Campaign map. You get your Ruidaur army, led by Morholt the Hillman. We'll cover him in a moment. But you also get 3 units of Ruidaur savages, pikemen, and scouts. From Shadun, you get Orc rabble, so you get fellas who aren't really very good. They're early game. They're kind of a slightly better version of Snagger. If you can train fellas instead of Snagger, always do. But Snagger and fellas do have their uses, as my campaign is proving. But there's Drangu the Bloody, your Orc starting general, and the only starting general who is an Orc. And over here in Litash, you've got Morholt. Not Morholt, he's over there. Chief Hoon Vorn, your faction heir. But he starts with a real rabble of Goblin Band and Goblin Archers, but he himself is very, very good. So your initial army, you could field probably a full banner army from the get-go, or just shy of, with some good, solid generals, which is always very nice. Now, in terms of leader, capital, and unique bodyguards, and your diplomats. So, of course, your capital is Karndum, where you will find your leader, Overlord Agendaur the Merciless, and there he is. Now, Agendaur comes with Temple Knights. Now, you can't train these. These are not available to Angmar. They are purely his retinue bodyguard. I will say this once and only once. Dark Numenorians never existed in Angmar. It is entirely a concept made up by the Battle for Middle-earth to add some variety. There weren't Dark Numenorians. The men of Rudauer were mostly hill men who turned against the Numenorians. There was some Numenorians amongst them who did turn, yes, but they are all dead. No orcs nor any evil Numenorians survived the purge of Angmar by Glorfindel and the king at the time who sent troops up from Gondor. I can't remember his name. I want to say... I can't remember. Someone will prove me right. But anyway, so there's no Dark Numenorians. They're an entirely Battle for Middle-earth concept. And of course, remember that Battle for Middle-earth happened thousands of years ago. Battle for Middle-earth covers the time when the realm of Angmar fell. So there aren't any Dark Numenorians left. So no, you can't train the Temple Knights. They have been sent here by Sauron to guard Agandaur, and they lead the Angmarim charge. So we're borrowing from the war in the north in that regard, but you can't train Dark Numenorians. They are his bodyguard, and that is it. And as you would have read in the welcome message, when they get below 77 men, they will never replenish to higher than that. So, your faction heir is Chief Hoonvorn, who is a dead wraith, and comes with Barrow-wights as his bodyguard. Now, about the 77 thing, he will of course replenish. Unless the Barrow-wights are capped at 50, he will replenish up to 77. I can't remember if they are capped. That's the only reason that they would not replenish. But he's a very good general. Barrow-wights are very, very good. They're certainly a useful unit in the early game, and he's wise to keep him alive. But he's your faction heir. The only other unique bodyguard you get, as I've said, is Morholt the Hillman, who is a Rudauer general, and he comes with some Rudauer archers. He is your early game, your only early game strong ranged unit, so use him very wisely. Your diplomat trains from the Barad Haleg, which means Ice Tower, and if you want to train another diplomat, of course, you've got to go out and take a city from someone else and train a diplomat from them, or just bribe diplomats. The AI at the moment in 1.2 is bribing so much. My attempts to reduce the bribery haven't worked that well. They have worked, but just not as well, and the diplomats are still bribing left, right, and centre. So, a real pain in the arse. But it's a minor thing. They can't bribe you very well, but they'll try and bribe your diplomats. So, either bribe or take new towns. That's how you get more diplomats. So, Rebel expansion. It's very self-explanatory. You go south. You go south and west. You've got Angsul, Gobadryan, Athelin, Fuerost, Baridonionach, Raskirvain, Brown Boat in Finnish, yes, Nochfaroclaw, and Morvatarth. All rebel provinces ripe for the picking. The Northern Dunedain will most likely focus on taking Baridonionach or Athelin, so you might meet them there. But Gobadryan, Angsul, Raskirvain, Nochfa, and Morva are all up for the taking. Although the Misty Mountains do have a tendency to go for Morvatarth themselves, so do watch out for that. The thing that I was speaking about at the beginning, this is what Fenestruinen should look like. Whereas if you downloaded on the 6th and you haven't re-downloaded 1.2.3, then it will just be a standard Southron village, which is of course incorrect. But anyway, so that's your Rebel expansion, everywhere south, but you can't go east, of course, because Gundabad blocks you off straight away. That brings you on to your neighbours. Who are your neighbours? Well, of course, you border the Misty Mountains, and you are also allied to the Misty Mountains. Them and Mordor are your only allegiances. But you are, unfortunately, at war with every single faction that resides in Eriador, and there's no way around that. So everyone out here is your enemy, and unfortunately for you, you are most of these factions' only enemy. Now, the Breelanders will get diverted to Dunland. That always happens. So you won't have to worry about Bree too much, because Dunland will take up a lot of the slack. But Linden, Eredluin, and the Northern Dunedain will make it their mission to make your life hell. So they are your chief enemies. So, economy and buildings. Well, you're an orc faction, so you can't upgrade any castles. So you have to factor that into your expansion. If you come across a Motte and Bailey and you take it, it will never be anything more than a Motte and Bailey. So do be cautious there. Other than that, though, you do get right up to the large city level. So orcs can upgrade the towns all the way, which is quite a nice little advantage. But do bear in mind that the orcish town battle maps are very difficult to defend. You don't get any stone walls, you don't get any real walls that you can even walk on, and you get like token level towers. Your towns are quite hard to defend, so do bear that in mind. But in terms of economy for Angmar, it's not too bad. Because you start in the mountains, you get the use of mines, of course. And in 1.2, gold and silver give a little bit more than they did in 1.1. So it's quite worthwhile trying to get mines as fast as you can. But outside of that, though, there's nothing particularly splendid about Angmar's money-making potential. I mean, your starting regions are reasonably wealthy at the game start. That's not too shabby. But when you compare them with places like Dol Amroth, which unfortunately you can't see because you don't own it, but Dol Amroth starts at about 1,000. So you don't make the most money. But it's certainly not hard in the early game as Angmar to stockpile a fair amount of finances to attempt to try and get money. Because in the later stages of the game, you'll find yourself heavily strapped for cash, despite the cheap nature of your army. In terms of buildings, you get, guild-wise, you get the Fighter's Pit, which just increases the experience bonus to troops trained there, and then experience bonus to troops trained in your whole army. Additionally, with the introduction of 1.2, of course, if you have a region that has a fort within it, such as Khan Doom, you can now build the Raider Camp. And from the Raider Camp, you can get the Raider Warband and the Raider Skirmishers. Now, the camp itself just increases your goods and allows you to recruit if you haven't already got a barracks, a town centre, or a farm. Not a barracks, sorry, a town centre or a farm. They're the other places that allow you to recruit. So if you build it first, you can then train the units from it. And the Raider Warband and Skirmishers are just nifty little units. They're not very good by any stretch of the imagination, as you can see, but they are still pretty cool and a nice little addition to any Orcish army, being considerably cheaper than most units. So, onto the scripts then. Angmar doesn't have any. There are no scripts. I know people have been asking for years to introduce a sort of Return of the Witch King script, and if we had a scripter who was working non-stop every day and we knew was going to be with us for, say, another year or so, for example, then maybe I would consider that, because I do think it's a cool idea, given that the Witch King is alive, and in this kind of fictitious universe, Angmar still exists. So I am in favour of the script, but I just can't see it ever being able to come to fruition, I'm afraid. And I don't want the game to be script heavy. So there are really no scripts for Angmar. And in terms of where's your garrison script going to arise, well, Khan Doom will get a garrison, so will Shadoon, and so will Litash, and that is it. Outside of those regions, you will need to upgrade the towns you take, just one level. So you just need to upgrade them by 1 point to get them to have a garrison, but you will never get a garrison in the heartlands of your enemies. So essentially, if you toggle Fog of War at game start, take a look around at everyone that isn't an Orc faction, then you'll never get a garrison in those regions. So, Bree, Arquette, all of the Shire, Anuminas, Fornos, for places close by you, Amun Sul, Tir Thuin, Fenestrian, not Coloniac, sorry, both Tharbads, Dunland, you'll never get a garrison in those places. But you will get a garrison in the Rebel regions once you upgrade that town or that castle one level. Of course, you can't upgrade castles, so you'll rarely get a garrison in a castle. But you will always get a garrison in the starting regions of your Orcish allies. So the whole of the Misty Mountains you'll get a garrison, the whole of Mordor, Isengard and Dol Guldur. So those are your garrison regions. Which means that you've got to be a bit on the careful side, because you're obviously expanding out into Eriador, but your garrison remains behind in Khan Doom. So you won't get too much use from that. Now, in terms of map changes for Angmar, there are very, very few. As I've already detailed from the last overview to this one, the introduction of Dol Bryn splits the Kamath Bryn region up, so there's a new region there. There's also, of course, a new region, Gobadrine and Fuirost, so there's more expansion possibilities out in northern Eriador. The loss of Pit Coranta means that Ruskia Ven is now a much bigger region, but it's a totally useless region. I don't think it can even upgrade beyond a town, so it's just a totally useless region. It gets very little money because it only borders that massive slave region, Angsul and Fuirost. So you can ignore it, basically. If your enemy gets it, even still, you can ignore it. The only people you don't want getting Ruskia Ven are the Northern Dunedain. But if anyone else gets it, it's never going to be a threat to you. So those are the only real map changes. There aren't really any river changes or bridge changes or anything major around your starting region. So that leads us on to the final point, tips and difficulty. Well, it's widely considered that amongst the sort of average player, the lay player, Angmar are quite tricky. You've got a lot of enemies who are intent on killing you straight away because you're the only enemy they face. And if you wait too long, Ered Luin can really outclass you. In the later game, they beat everything you've got. And whilst you do get some really good late game units for an Orc faction, as we'll see in a moment, the dwarves are still better than you. And if you let them get a lot of ground through Eriador, it can be quite a challenge towards the end. So do bear that in mind. Now, in terms of tips, a lot of the regions between you and the Northern Dunedain, or in fact every region between you and the Northern Dunedain, is a village. So from Morvatar to Gobadrine, they're all villages. And villages aren't very useful. You can train Snagger and you can train Orc Fellers, but both of those units have very niche roles. They fill a very basic role of dying, essentially. They are arrow fodder. You use them to tie up enemies you don't want to deal with just yet, or you use them to take the brunt of a cavalry charge to then tie up the cavalry. That's really their only use. So getting hordes of those is never a game-winning strategy. So trying to avoid these villages can actually be a positive strategy. I mean, one strategy I tried in my Angmar attempt was to rush straight through Angsul, ignore Gobadrine, take Frirost, and get to Garth Helagoth as fast as possible, which allowed me to then strike out against Ered Luin without giving them any ground. Another good tip is because the Breelanders are worse than you. The Northern Dunedain, Ered Luin and Linden will all kick you up and down the football field till the cows come home, but the Breelanders can't hope to match the Angmarim. They're the only nation you kind of outclass in this area. So by allowing them to take places that used to belong to other stronger enemies is a valid strategy. The Breelanders, like you, rely on numbers. So if you can outnumber them, and the fact that your units in the late game are better than theirs, you can really, really do some damage. So by taking places kind of in a raid style, and then ensuring that the Breelanders then take it from you, is a valid strategy. Because the Northern Dunedain will only be a thorn in your side right up until the day they die. But that's the campaign side. So that's everything I think that I can say about Angmar on this side. Many people have lots of different strategies. I've heard tell that quite a popular and easy way to win is by turtling, waiting till the barracks event, and then striking out with a huge fortune and massive armies of your very, very best units, and then no one can stop you. I've also heard people say that it's very profitable and worthwhile turning completely on the Misty Mountains, wiping them out, and then taking their very resource-rich regions in the mountains themselves, because the mountainous regions are very wealthy. They border a lot of provinces, which is always a money bringer, and they also get a lot of mines, so they get money through that. And they're also very, very big, because every settlement in the mountains is a custom settlement, which means it starts as large as it's going to be at turn 1. So they make money very easily. So that's another strategy, is backstabbing the Misty Mountains and taking their regions from them. Or, of course, rushing Ered Luin, rushing the Northern Dunedain. But whatever you do, try and be clever with these villages. They are nothing but a drain. Obviously, you still want them because they can become useful in the future, but in the early game, they can really slow you down. So do be cautious with those. But that's that. I'll see you on the battlefield. Welcome to the battle side of Angmar. So, before we continue, just one little thing. I'm not going to split the units off into the AOR units and the normal units, so the units that are restricted by region and those you can train everywhere, because obviously the original faction overviews cover that in way more detail. So instead, I'm just going to bung them all together, and I will talk about it when we get to that individual unit, if it's a restricted one or not. And so it will always be archers on the left, infantry in the middle, and cavalry on the right. So, if we're looking at the grand overview of Angmar, then we can see that their biggest failing, absolute failing, is range. You only get 2 archers in your entire army, and only the skirmishers as javelin men. Now, there is a mercenary Rudauer unit called Axemen, and they throw javelins, but they're mercenaries, so you can't train them from your barracks. Unless we've changed it, but they weren't listed in the custom battle, so no, I don't think you can. But anyway, so this is your army. Very light on archers, very light on cav, heavy on infantry. That's the overview of you. So let's start at the very beginning then. In your pre-barracks event, way at the very beginning, your first line are, of course, the Snagger, who unfortunately, because they're at the beginning of the list, are our general for this battle. Snagger are abysmal. There's their stats, absolutely terrible. As I've already said, you use them to soak up arrows and to die. You never really use them to actually do anything. Slightly better than them, but in the same sort of category, the Orc Fellers. Now, as you can see, they have the same defense as the Snagger, but they're substantially more aggressive. So they actually can kill things, but you don't want them being your mainline units. They will die. Oh, sorry, let me scroll down. One thing that's common amongst all Orcs is that they fight better in mountains, they fight better in snow, and they have terrible morale. So even the worst human unit has always got better morale than an Orc. So that you've always got to keep that in mind. Your army will rout very easily. But the first restricted unit, this is only available from Ruidour, and these units are also available for the Northern Dunedain. As many people questioned, where were they in the Northern Dunedain overview? Well, there wasn't enough room to show them, but there is enough room in the Angmar one, who they are predominantly fighting for. So, like last time, they're covered in this video, not the Northern Dunedain. But the Northern Dunedain can train these readily. They are available. They're one of your mainstream early game units. All of the Ruidours are. So, Ruidour Pikemen. Now, this unit is very good. If you can get these in your army, do. They're a really good early game unit, but they are, obviously, as I say, very rare. Most of Ruidour is held by the Misty Mountains, or Rebels, at the start of the game. So you actually have to expand out even just to get to them. But Litash does allow you to train Ruidour units, despite being quite a break to where Ruidour actually is. We allow Litash, and I think possibly Shadoon as well. I can't recall, but Ruidour Pikemen are your best early game unit. Their morale is better than all the orcs around them, and they're pikemen, who are always good. This game, pikes are godlike. It's always worth getting them if you can. But then your first sort of mainline unit are the Goblin Band. Now, there's a few of these available in Litash straight away. Chief Hoonvorn has them. But the Goblin Band are the first units that can actually sort of hold a line with their 8 total defense. And that comes from the fact that they wear some sort of real semblance of armor, and they've got shields. And also because some units have got to be better than other units, and the Goblin Band have been chosen. But all 4 of these will be available pretty much straight away, albeit the Ruidour Pikemen are restricted. But also in this tier comes one of your first archery units, which doesn't bode well for the rest of your archery units, but the Goblin Archers. Now, obviously, Goblin Archers are actually quite good. When you compare them with Snagger and Orc Fellers, they basically outclass them in every area, save for they're not as aggressive as the Fellers. But their defense is way better, and they've got a melee attack which is at least does damage. But their missile attack is 3, which isn't too bad, and they're better than sort of Snagger Archers, who are available to the Misty Mountains. And there's their stats there. But so Goblin Archers will be the bulk of your archer force for a considerable amount of time. And we also, at this tier, unfortunately find all 3 of your cavalry units, albeit the Ruidour Scouts are restricted by region. But first of all, the unit that many of you will know are the Warg Riders, the base unit. Wargs have always been a very charge-heavy unit, so their charge is very, very, very damaging. But their defense is always a bit sort of average. They will die in prolonged melee very quickly. They will also die very easily to arrow fire. Arrow fire is the key killer of Wargs, so do be careful when facing the Northern Dunedain. But their attack is very high and their charge is very high, which makes them lethal charging units. If you can do the hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, the Wargs are one of the best hit and run units the game actually has, because of their insanely high charge and their wide availability. They're really easy to train, their recruitment's very quick, their replenishment is very quick. You can easily build an army of Warg Riders almost straight away if you go straight for them in both Shadoon and Khan Dum. And as many people have said, they are the key to victory for Angmar. So, capitalizing on that, and the new unit, one of only 2, I think, in 1.2. I'm not sure if the Scourge Raiders were in 1.1 or not, but one of the definitely brand new unit you won't have seen before are the Skirmishers. Now, these follow on exactly the same pattern as the Wargs, with a high charge, sorry, not a high charge, with a high sort of aggression. They've got a good missile attack of 8, but their defense, attack, and charge is all worse than the Riders. So you don't want to keep these in battle. You don't even really want to use these in melee at all if you can help it. Try and use all their javelins before you're forced to commit them. And then if you absolutely must commit them, try and ensure that it is always flanking or rear charges. Their charge isn't really good enough to make their charge front on even that impactful. And their defense is even worse than the Riders, and their melee attack is so poor that you just don't want these in battle. But their javelins and their ability to run away, second to none. Well, they are second to none. They're not really great javelins. But considering you get no javelin units, they are certainly useful to you. So you do want to add a few of these to the Warg Riders, but if you are going for a cavalry battalion or a cavalry sort of army, make it predominantly Warg Riders and then get a few skirmishers to support. And then finally, the only real cavalry unit, the dedicated sort of cav unit, are of course the Ruidour Scouts. Now they have the same defense as the Warg Riders, but their attack is worse and their charge is worse, so they're nowhere near as aggressive. But they are slightly quicker thanks to the animation of the 2 units. If I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken. But the Warg Riders as well, because the Warg Riders are actually camels. So there's a little information tidbit for you, I don't know if you knew, but Wargs in the game are considered camels, so they're actually very good against other cavalry, but it does make them suffer from all the things that camels suffer from, which is a weakness to arrow fire, and I think any unit that does extra damage, yes, almost across the board, any unit that gets a bonus against cavalry, say a spear unit, gets an additional bonus against camels. So if their bonus against cavalry was, say, +2 attack, their bonus against camels will be +3. So wargs are very, very weak to anti-cav units, which is why the Rudauer scouts will feel a little niche, because they are dedicated cavalry and not camels. They don't suffer from those weaknesses. And there's their stats there. So there are two little things. The Rudauer scouts are better at picking off anti-cav units, but they're still not amazing. They're a very basic unit. But the Warg Riders are better at picking off other cavalry and hitting with an aggressive charge. But the fact that they're camels as well means their animation is a bit clunky, and they don't run down routing units very well. And there's nothing really we can do about that, I'm afraid. So the Rudauer scouts are your chief prison takers, or prisoner capturers. Which is an odd little trait to have, but there we are. Right, so we move on then. So before you hit the barracks event, but still units that you can train, and the units that really should make up your bread and butter, as I said at the beginning, are the Orc Halberdiers and the Orc Marauders. Now, the Goblin Band, I will submit, they do have an 8 defense, an attack of 3, and a charge of 2. But and there's obviously 228 of them. The Orc Halberdiers have the Halberd animation, which means despite their defense of 7, and their lower attack and lower charge, or slightly higher attack and slightly higher charge, sorry, but lower defense, they are actually so superior to the Goblin Band, it's unreal. The Orc Halberdiers are your mainstay in the early game. You want armies bred almost entirely of Halberdiers and Rudauer pikemen, and almost no one will be able to stop you. So the Halberd is very, very, very good. But of course, they start to get slightly better morale as well. So they've got average morale and average morale response, along with the Goblin Band. So they can at least hold the line. Now, aggression is the name of the game with the Marauders. Their defense is slightly higher again, they're more troops of the line, and their attack is also higher. So whilst the Halberdiers are holding the line, the Marauders are flanking around to get those bonuses. Their numbers are a big bonus here as well. There are 200 Orc Marauders. And for a unit with stats like that, that's quite good. Far superior to units of equal stat for, say, Gondor and Bree. Because you just get more of them in each battalion. So the Marauders should be your aggression, and the Halberdiers should be your defenders. But the Marauders can also act defensively quite well against early tier units, so they're good all around. But Angmar's real strike unit in the early game, and the best unit you've got for taking down any armoured enemy or general or anyone that's flanks are unprotected, are the Savages of Rudauer. Because they are effective against armour. And they have an insanely high attack of 7 for a unit that's AAA. So that's very, very useful indeed. They're really, really good at killing, say, the bodyguards of the Northern Dunedain. Their charge bonus is 6, which means they're best when you flank or you hit the enemy's rear with them, and obviously you're actually charging. But their defense is 8 as well, so they're not going to go down too easily. They're a really good all-round unit, and you really want to try and get them whenever possible. I'm almost 100% certain they come in before the barracks event, but as has been the trait of these videos from a year ago right up to now, I don't tend to look these things up. But then it allows you to at least learn some things of your own, I suppose, without just blindly spoon-feeding. But I suppose I should know everything. But it's been years since we added them, and I didn't want to look it up. So I didn't. But I'm pretty sure they come before the barracks event, because I'm fairly certain that only the archers and the nobles come after. Or they've since been changed to swordsmen, but they used to be called Rudauer nobles. So that leads us on to after the barracks event. Well, let's cover the archer first, because he's out here on his own. You get the Rudauer archers. Rudauer archers are dependable archers. They're the best archers you get, but they're already worse than the Northern Dunedain Rangers, who get, and the Northern Dunedain get Rangers straight away. So you're always going to be outclassed in archery. The only nation that you could possibly hope to beat in an archer battle is Ered Luin, because even the Breelanders get the woodland. I can't remember what they're called. Woodland Hunters? Yeah, the Woodland Hunters. And the Woodland Hunters are substantially better than the Archers because they're much more readily available, and they've got an equally good missile attack. So you're not going to beat anyone in archery save for the Misty Mountains and Ered Luin. But if you are forced to return to archery, the Rudauer archers will at least hold up. Their armour is slightly better again, so they won't die too quickly. And their melee is dependable if they need to call upon it. But the real strength, of course, is the fact that they're your best archer unit. And as I've mentioned, Morholt the Hillman starts with a unit of these at the start of the game, and you will find that he's one of your most used generals. But countering them, or assisting them, are the Rudauer Swordsmen. And the Rudauer Swordsmen are the best unit that Rudauer has to offer, with a 19 total defense, an 8 attack and a 4 charge. They're just troops of the line. They're just line troops. Nothing really amazing about them, but they can at least hold the line. And if you can get them, again, do. But the Men of Rudau cost slightly more than the Orcs, though, so it is always a bit of a cost to efficiency ratio you've got to work out in your mind. But another new unit, I don't think these were available in 1.1 or in 0.52, which is when the old overviews were done, is the Scourge Raiders. And the Scourge Raiders are a later game sort of strike unit, much like the Rudau Savages. So again, they're EAA, effective against armor, and they've got a higher attack of 9, a higher defense of 14, and a charge of 7. So they are the late game version of the Rudau Savages. The Orc Raiders, of course, or the Scourge Raiders, are also available everywhere, so they're very good flanking and strike infantry, because they're slightly cheaper than your next alternative, the Witch Realm Marauders. Now, these three units these three units are essentially your elites. So whilst these units are available after the barracks event, they're your main line post-barracks event. And these are your elite post-barracks events. So you've got Witch Realm Marauders, Witch Realm Pikemen, and Guardians of Kharndum. Now we'll start with the Guardians because they're only available in Kharndum. You can't train them anywhere else. And as you will have noticed, they look identical to the Angmar bodyguards, so it can be easy to get them mixed up. But remember that the Angmar bodyguards will always actually have a portrait, not an image of the unit when you're in battle. So you won't get them mixed up because of that. But on the battlefield, it's easy to get them mixed up because they're identical. But anyway, the Guardians of Kharndum are good. As I say, Orc units don't tend to get very elite units. And so, even though these aren't amazing by any stretch of the imagination, I mean, Dwarven elites have a 30s defense. Many elite and Elven units have an attack of 12, 13, 14, 15. So you're outmatched by many of your enemies. But for an Orc army, this is fantastic stats. They also inspire troops nearby, so it's very worthwhile getting them on board. Their morale, they're one of the few units who can't run away. So they're showing the other Orcs how it's done. So a very good unit, but they're only available in Kharndum, as I say. But units that you can train a little bit more freely, and we'll start with the Pikemen, are the Witch Realm Pikemen. Now, these are available everywhere, and these are your mainstream elites. Now, remember that these are pikemen, so their seemingly low defense stat of 17 is offset by their insanely powerful animation. As many of you will know, I hammer this home in every video, pikemen are very powerful in this game. Not this mod, in this game, thanks to their animation. So that's why pikemen tend to have slightly lower stats than you might expect, but it's countered by their insanely powerful animation. So then those who Witch Realm Pikemen, very, very good. Shouldn't even be a decision. If you can train them, train them. Pikemen are always powerful, no matter what level they are. Even the lowliest farmhand pikeman, the game's worst pike unit, is still substantially useful to you. And it goes without saying that pikes get huge bonuses against cavalry, huge bonuses. So they're hidden bonuses that you can't see, but rest assured that a pike unit will shred a cavalry unit. Doesn't matter if it's the Swan Knights of Dol Amroth, if it's the Lok Inas Rim of Rune, or if it's the Arthedain Royal Guard, even the lowliest pike unit will take a lot of souls down with them before they die. So pikes, always, always advisable. And then lastly, you get the Witch Realm Marauders, and the Marauders are strike infantry. So again, effective against armor, again a high attack of 9, same as the Scourge Raiders. Same charge as the Scourge Raiders, but they're more heavily armored, and they have a better morale. Very good. Very good morale, as opposed to good morale. So the Witch Realm Marauders are just the third tier of your strike infantry, and the best version of your strike infantry you've got. The only issue is, though, that the Scourge Raiders are faster. They run quicker on the battlefield. So they're better to get to places that you might need to hit very, 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 very quickly. And very importantly, they can hit them better than the Marauders can. So do remember that. But then we come to the real strike infantry of Angmar. If we were to sum Angmar up with a sort of Age of Empires style categorization, they would be the strike infantry nation. You get a lot of strike infantry. Warg Riders essentially are a kind of flowery version of strike infantry. They're terrible in prolonged melee, but they're excellent on the attack, very good at flanking and rear charging. Then you get the Savages, then you get the Scourges, then you get the Marauders, and then you get 2 units of Trolls to add into that. Now, the Cave Trolls are actually available, I think, before the Barracks event. No, the Troll thing doesn't come in until after the Barracks event. But the Cave Trolls are the first unit, so really this probably should have been more like Cave Trolls there and Snow Trolls here. Because Cave Trolls are very, very good. You and the Misty Mountains both get them. They're the base game's Troll. I think every other Troll is kind of based off of these, so all the other Troll stats take these stats as a base. They're better at fighting in snow than they are fighting anywhere else. You can't hide them. They get a bonus against cavalry. They can't run away. Trolls can't run away. And they get outrageous stats. 4 hit points, 29 defense, 35 attack. Their attack does knockback. It hits more than 1 unit per a time. Their charge obviously knocks units down. They're very good. But do remember, as I say in every video, I'm not going to explain it. Don't ask questions on it. Just trust me that it has to be. Trolls are infantry. They are not cavalry. Stakes and pikemen have no bonus against them. The best way of killing trolls is threefold. Armor piercing, ballistas, and arrow fire. Those 3 are your best way of killing trolls, in that order, essentially. It's arguable that the ballistae are actually better, but because they aren't 100% accurate, and if you keep your trolls moving, then they don't always get good kills. But ballistae are almost one-hit kill, so arguably the best way. But a good unit, say for example the Marauders, if you flank some trolls with a charge from the Marauders, they kill so many of them in that initial charge. So effective against armor, very good. High attack stats, also very, very good. Pikemen don't get any bonus against trolls. And indeed, trolls are actually one of the best units to counter pikes with, because their animation supersedes the animation of the pikes, and they decimate the pike units. So if you're having trouble with a pike battalion, send in some trolls, because the pikes don't get any bonus against them. None whatsoever. So those are the cave trolls, and let's compare their better brother, the snow troll. So same sort of stats. They frighten nearby enemy infantry. They frighten nearby enemies. Doesn't say infantry, but it is infantry. Don't know why it doesn't add it on. Maybe that's cavalry, and cavalry doesn't fit. So anyway, the snow trolls, as you can see, are slightly better. So a 29 defense for the cave trolls with a 4 hit points turns to a 6 hit points with 36 defense and a 42 attack. Again, they can't run away. Again, bonuses, blah, blah, blah. They get bonuses against all kinds of mounts, including Mumakil. So they're good cavalry killers. But cavalry do get a very good charge bonus against these. Because they're infantry, and cavalry are best against infantry, you will find that being attacked in the rear by a solid cavalry charge can actually do a lot of damage. And so you've got to watch out for units like Gandalf the White, or if the Northern Dunedain, if you allow them to get to the late game, and they still have a Numinas or Fornost. If they can train any Dunedain Royal Guard, or Arthedain Royal Guard, sorry, then they'll be a threat to trolls, so do watch out. But the snow trolls are really, really good. According to many stats that I've seen from people, snow trolls are one of the best ways of winning the game as Angmar. They're one of the best units in the game, full stop. They are way up there with the Ologhai, Mumakil, and Great Beasts, who all, unfortunately, allow a Mordor can train. And that brings us finally on to your bodyguard. So Angmar get a very good bodyguard, and they will make up a large chunk of your army in the early game when general adoptions come at you thick and fast. And of course, every adoption brings with it one of these guys. They have basically identical stats to the Guardians of Kharndum because they are exactly the same unit. The only difference comes in that their defense skill is 6, their defense skill is 7, but the Guardians of Kharndum have a higher armor stat. So, it's better to have a kind of balance between armor and defense, because a high armor stat will allow you to shrug off arrows better, but it will make you so susceptible to armor piercing that you'll basically be paper to an armor piercing unit. But a high defense stat will mean that armor piercing has very little damage against you, but arrows will shred you. So getting a balance between those two is often the challenge of the modder. But Angmar bodyguards are just very, very good. They can run away, so you can at least tell your general to back away. You're not restricted like you are with the Guardians, because a general that can't run away can actually be a hindrance. So there we are. Angmar. That is every unit. As I say, I think the only new units are the Scourge Raiders and the Warg Skirmishers. And other than that, everyone else you've seen before. So let's charge everyone in just so we get a little bit of a battle. We're up against a Northern Dunedain force that the computer selected for itself. So when you tell it to auto fill out the rest of my ranks. And when it does that, it gives the units increased armor, increased experience, all sorts. So this army, if we actually fought this, would ruin me. But additionally, obviously, as you can see, I'm not actually trying at all. So we're just getting to a point where we can show off the units a bit better. So Warg's up against those are the Arthedain Royal Guard I spoke so much of. Those Wargs are going to die, and I expect they'll take 1 or 2 Royal Guards with them. Oh, there we go. Our captain's already dead. As the forces of the Northern Dunedain smash into the forces of Angmar. Oh, look, they've got Arthedain Knights in there as well. And, since the last video, the Arthedain Men-at-Arms have been renamed Dunedain Men-at-Arms. So, you no longer think they're only available in Arthedain. There's our pike line wall moving in slowly, our pike wall. Aha! The Royal Guard are charging into some pikemen. Oh, they thought better of it. They thought better of it. See, look, it's like just a knife going through butter. They just fall as the pikes press onward. This is the Northern Dunedain's arguably best unit, and it's just dying. Although they've hit the Marauders in the back there, but the Marauders will be good against heavy cavalry because of their armor piercing. They're carving their way through as the pikes enclose. Oh, they've charged the pikes from the side though, but if we can turn and face, we'll start to kill off the cavalry as well. But anyway, I think I will end that there. So I do hope you've enjoyed this Angmar overview. As ever, the last overview is probably popping up on screen 12 seconds before the end of this video, and you can see it in the comments below. So that will give you a more detailed look at the units, because very little has changed for Angmar. Stay tuned next Sunday for whatever faction is next. As always, I'm just going to be working through the list as I did it originally. So if you want to see a certain unit, just go to the playlist, find out where in the order it is, and you know you're going to have to wait that many weeks. But for now, that's everything. So to take away from this, Angmar very much the same as it was before, a very heavy focus on strike infantry and infantry in general. And if you downloaded patch 1.2, basically any time before this video, essentially. But, well, if you downloaded 1.2 24 hours before this video released, then re-download it, because you'll get a few fixes. But that will be all. So until we speak again, dear friends, Navarre and den Pedimad Melonin, and farewell.